Welcome back to Face the Nation. We go now to Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York. Good to have you here, Congressman. There's a lot to get to with you, but I want to pick up on something we were discussing with the governor of Maryland, and that was this redistricting, gerrymandering that is happening. The president encouraged Texas Republicans to do it. Now California Democrats are trying to get districts redrawn as well. Why do you so strongly oppose this?
I think gerrymandering is fundamentally wrong, and it is at the heart of why Congress has been broken for so many years. If you look 3 decades ago, there were over 100 competitive districts. Last November, only 35 seats were decided by 5 points or less, and mine wasn't even one of them, despite the fact that Kamala Harris won my seat. I won by 6.5 points. So when you look at the map across the country, the fact is roughly 400 members are not in competitive districts. They're focused primarily on primaries and not general elections, and therefore they're not focused on appealing to a much broader swath of the electorate. And I think that obviously reflects itself when you're actually trying to negotiate legislation and beyond. But when you look at the redistricting situation, obviously, both parties do not have clean hands here. Democrats in New York did mid-decade redistricting last year in 2024 at the behest of Hakeem Jeffries, who wanted to pick up seats in New York to become speaker. Right. They gerrymandered the maps after stacking the court and getting a favorable ruling ordering a mid-decade redistricting, despite the fact that they gerrymandered maps in 2022 and those were thrown out because it violated the state constitution. So now New York is going for a third bite at the apple, according to Governor Hochul, who has made it clear since the moment she took office in 2021 that she would use redistricting to help Democrats win the House. So this is what you're dealing with, red states and blue states trying to get electoral advantage right now.
I guess what's different now is the president's direct involvement in this, which is why it's interesting you have legislation to try to oppose some of this. Do you really think you can get that done if the president of the United States doesn't want it done?
Look, obviously, it's going to be a fight, but this is something that I fundamentally believe we need to reform. We need to ban gerrymandering nationwide. We need to ban mid-decade redistricting. I want to include term limits as part of those reforms because I fundamentally believe when you have members of Congress like Chuck Schumer, who's been in elected office since 1974, never held a job outside of elected office, it's time to go. You need term limits. You need overall reform. So I'm going to fight tooth and nail to get this done. Obviously, you know, there's going to be strong headwinds from both parties because, frankly, I don't think both parties are interested in reforming the way Congress functions.
No, they want the majority, period. On the question, though, that we have also been discussing with the governor, that is crime. The president of the United States has mentioned New York as another city he wants to look at to deploy National Guard troops. Do you think that's the best use of federal taxpayer dollars? And are you comfortable with that happening in your state?
Well, crime has been a major problem in New York for years, and Kathy Hochul and Albany and New York City Democrats have failed miserably to tackle this crime crisis.
Do you want National Guard troops?
By the way, Kathy Hochul has mobilized National Guard's troops to go into the subway system because of the crime in the subway system. So that has been done, obviously, for the purpose of surging resources and trying to prevent crime. When you look at the fact that in New York City, for instance, 80% of gun crimes do not result in a conviction or prosecution, that 80% of these individuals are released back out onto the street despite using guns in the commission of a crime. You look at Washington, D.C., 1.7% of gun crime convictions result in jail time. So when Democrats talk about gun violence, How come they don't want to actually prosecute and enforce the law against criminals who are using guns in the commission of a crime?
No, but that's a local
problem,
that's a local issue that would need
rate,
to get changed. But in terms of the question on the troops, you'd rather troops
Margaret,
than FBI agents or ATF agents or DEA agents. You don't want federal agents who are trained law enforcement officers in New York City. You would rather National Guardsmen who have to be trained to police?
No. Don't put words in my mouth. I'd rather all of the above. The FBI, the DEA, ATF. I've met with ATF just a few weeks ago in my office on this very issue of really cracking down on gun crimes and prosecuting criminals who use guns in the commission of a crime. I was proud last year to lead the passage of the Undetectable Firearms Act, a common sense bipartisan piece of gun safety legislation enacted into law in the 1980s. We extended it 7 years to make sure that no gun is manufactured or sold with less than 3.7 ounces of metal. I led that effort. And the reason I did is because we do not want guns on the street being used in the commission of a crime. And yet, as I pointed out, you look at Washington, D.C., only 1.7% of gun crime convictions result in jail time. This is why you've seen the homicide rate double in less than a decade. It's outrageous. And it's exactly why the president is cracking down on crime in major cities. And as we saw in California, he is legally authorized to do so.
I want to ask you about something in New York State that matters. A good amount of money from that chip spill went to New York. On Friday, the White House announced there's going to be a change to how the government deals with that money that's meant to make America independent of Asian computer chip manufacturing and bring it all back on shore. The president wants to buy a 10% stake in Intel. That company says it's going to now basically have U.S. taxpayers as a shareholder, own 10%. As a conservative, do you think that the government should have ownership stakes in private companies?
Generally speaking, no. I think when you look at prior history, when we've had, for instance, the bank bailouts, when we've had the auto bailouts, in the aftermath of the collapse of the market in 2008, the American taxpayer really didn't get a return on that. I think what the president is seemingly trying to do is get a return on these tens of billions of dollars that are being invested by U.S. taxpayers into companies like Intel to manufacture chips. And so rather than just give the money away, get a return on that investment. Obviously, this is a national security issue. We want to be in control of the manufacturing of semiconductors. That
Congressman,
is
I'm sorry to cut you off.
Policy.
I'm being told I have to go to a commercial break, so I'm going to leave it there. We'll be right back. We turn now to the U.S. economy. Mohamed El-Erian is the Chief Economic Advisor at Allianz, and he joins us this morning from Greenwich, Connecticut. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret.
So we saw the Federal Reserve Chair signal on Friday that the Fed is going to, as expected, begin lowering rates very soon. But he's also cited slowing economic growth and a cooling job market. So why then did the financial markets rally?
Because he finally pivoted to the risk that matters most for the U.S. economy right now. By construct, the Fed has to deliver two things: maximum employment and price stability. And the Fed is looking at slightly higher inflation and a weakening labor market. And what Powell finally did, and many of us feel he should have done this earlier, is he said the risk to the employment side is higher than the risk to the inflation side, and therefore an interest rate cut is warranted. As you know, many of us felt he should have cut last month.
Well, the Fed chair said significantly higher tariffs are remaking the entire global trade system. Tighter immigration policy has slowed labor growth, and there are big tax and regulation changes you can't quite, quantify at this point. But it's a lot of uncertainty. Since economists have to build off of models and data, How do you predict where we're going if basically he's saying, throw out your models?
So one of the problems is he hasn't looked forward enough. He's been very data dependent, and therefore he has tended to be late. Look, there is something promising in our future, and that is productivity enhancement that comes from exciting innovation in AI, in life sciences, in robotics, and other areas. We just have to manage a challenging few months in the period ahead. And if that challenge is mishandled, we will not be able to get the opportunities that we have that offset a lot of structural headwinds, and that includes high debt and high deficits.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about something we were discussing with Congressman Lawler just before you, and that is this unusual decision for the U.S. government to take a stake in chipmaker Intel. That company's been struggling of late, and its CEO was criticized by the President of the United States. He was criticized by the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Tom Cotton. President Trump mentioned all of that on Friday, and he said this.
He walked in wanting to keep his job, and he ended up giving us $10 billion for the United States. So we picked up $10 billion, and we do a lot of deals like that.
The president said the CEO wanted to keep his job, so he offered a 10% stake in his company. Is this signaling a new era for U.S. policy? I mean, central planning of the economy?
I don't think so. Margaret, look, as the congressman said, it's good to send a message that companies will not get something for nothing. And that is what they've gotten used to since 2008, all the bailouts. And what the U.S. is saying now is which were paid back, but at the time, the government took enormous risk in many, many areas. The most important distinction, if I may here, is between ownership and control. Yes, the government can own 10%, but it must not control how this company manages its affair. Because once we go down that road, that is a really dangerous road, and that would eat away at what makes America really special, which is a dynamic entrepreneurial economy.
Mm-hmm. And I believe the Commerce Secretary said there won't be control, but that is something to watch for. I want to also ask you about political pressure, not just on the Federal Reserve Chair, which you've nodded to, but the president is also now threatening to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. They're accusing her, without publicly disclosed evidence, of mortgage fraud and urging an investigation. In fact, the Justice Department wrote a letter to Chair Powell encouraging her to be removed. Are you concerned that this is starting to be a pattern here of political interference with the Federal Reserve?
So these allegations are unproven, and it's important to stress that. Having just said that, this is the 5th time in the last 5 years that there has been allegations against a Fed official. And already 4 of them have had to resign. So what I'm concerned about is that there seems to have been a culture that has developed at the Fed that has resulted in these 4 resignations. But I am very worried about preserving Fed independence. An independent central bank is critical to the well-being of the economy. And there's lots of reasons for that. So, you know, one has to distinguish between the two. I can't speak to the unproven allegations, but I do think it's really important to defend the central bank independence.
Well, as I understand it, the governor has said she wants to, share information and is denying wrongdoing here. But just the fact that it is the president directing the attention towards her, doesn't this suggest that even if Jerome Powell steps aside as head of the Federal Reserve, that this isn't going to stop this big spotlight on the central bank that is so powerful, and that the fear you have of political interference may not go away?
Yes, and my fear and my concern is that the longer Chair Powell is in his position, and it runs out in May, the longer he's in his position until then, the more this acts as a magnet for attacking not only deeper attacks from the president, but much broader from the political system. And that's one thing that quite a few people are worried about.
Mm-hmm. Mohamed El-Erian, Thank you so much for sharing your insight today. We'll leave it there. We'll be back in a moment. We return now to Gaza and that stunning declaration Friday by a monitoring group that Gaza City is experiencing man-made famine and that those conditions will expand soon. UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell joins us now. We want to warn our viewers there will be some upsetting images in this segment. Executive Director Russell, thank you for joining us. We've spoken so many times over the past few years about the catastrophic starvation. Now you have this technical designation, so rare to see a famine here. They project it's going to spread. Can you explain in real world terms, what does this mean for the children who live there?
Well, thank you, Margaret. Let me say this. It's been now almost 2 years since October 7th. And since then, Israeli children have been killed and taken hostage. And now we're seeing Palestinian children finally facing what we've been yelling and screaming about for months and months and months, which is a terrible famine. We've estimated at this point that about 18,000 children in Gaza have already died. And those are children who died from a whole range of issues. But when you think about that, that's about 28 children a day. That's almost a classroom of children every single day who have died since the beginning of this conflict. We have been saying, beware, right? This famine is just right around the corner, and it's almost like you're screaming into an abyss. It's shocking that it's happened because, as you said, it happens so rarely, but it's not surprising. And what it means really is that children have been spending months and months without sufficient food, and we see just a horrible situation where children are on the verge of starvation and ultimately dying from starvation. And I think, for your viewers who haven't seen this, and hopefully many of them have not, it is a haunting image. Children literally waste away, and you see it in rooms where, suddenly they're all quiet. The children are so quiet because they have no energy even to cry. And to see that happen, and especially in a place where food is not very far away, right? There's no reason. This did not happen because there were cyclones or, droughts. This happened because we could not get enough aid into these children.
And as you know, the Israeli government entity that oversees the Palestinian territories, it's called COGAT, says there is no famine. They say the UN data is flawed. The Prime Minister's office says these are fabrications and due to prejudice. Can you explain how you know what you know? We are showing images that we know journalists have shot, journalists who live inside Gaza, because journalists are not allowed into Gaza to report. How do you know that what you're saying is fact?
Let me say two things about that. One is the IPC, which is the organization that makes this determination, is an independent organization. They're technical people. They're not political people. And they monitor this as they go. When they look at issues like what are the levels of food deprivation, what's the acute malnutrition level, how many starvation-related deaths. So it's a very technical assessment. And I think we've seen in other places that this is very accurate. I would also say, to me, it's kind of obscene that we are having these conversations arguing about whether the methodology works or not. We know children are dying, right? I am tired of a discussion about, well, are we giving the right information or not? First of all, let the international press in. Let them make determinations. I mean, we've talked about this, Margaret, of you coming. You should see it yourself. Everyone should be able to get in there. Absent that, we're going to have to rely on the data that we have, the people who are there. And I can tell you from the UNICEF perspective, our people are tortured by this. I mean, I have spoken to our staff and they are seeing children who are incredibly deprived. Many thousands of children who have had amputations and are, it's just one terrible thing after another for children. And to suggest that there's anything funny going on here is really, in my mind, just almost making the situation worse, right? Just stop the discussion, stop the arguing, and address the problem. Get food in there. Take care of these children. Make sure that they have the wherewithal to survive and to have a decent future.
And and the Israeli government controls who gets in and who gets out. On the question, though, of making sure that the food you do get in gets to the right people, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, and another Mideast envoy have said the UN agencies may not like it, but if the Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is the only thing really allowed to operate, then maybe there needs to be some compromise. Why not? The United States government is putting $30 million to work there. Why not work with them?
You know, look, the methodology of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not something that is consistent with the way humanitarians work. That's a simple answer. And honestly, you know, if you think about it, the UN had 400 places where we would distribute aid. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation had 4. Okay, and you have seen on television, you have seen this video of these almost apocalyptic situations where people are streaming towards these places trying to get food. People are getting shot. It's a terrible situation, and it doesn't work. It's not working that well. Now, look, I don't much care if the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation does some distribution. Just let us do our work too. Let us in. We know how to do this distribution. And when I say we, it's not just UNICEF, it's the UN, it's the other international NGOs. We do it all around the world. We've done it for decades. We know how to do it. We know how to do it in a way that it gets to the people who need it. And do both. I'm fine with that, but at least make sure that humanitarians can get in there and distribute the aid fairly and make sure that these children are not dying unnecessarily. Nobody wants that. President Trump has said that. Yeah. Nobody wants to say that.
He did indeed. I want to ask you as well about Sudan, where there was a massive humanitarian crisis. If the United States is not leading efforts to get aid in there, is anyone else stepping up?
You know, look, the United States has the ability to be such a force for good, and we need them to step up and do more. Sudan, as you say, it's the largest displacement crisis in the world. Millions of children are on the move. They are not in school. We now have a horrible outbreak of cholera, which is very destructive and kills children within hours if they can't get aid. I mean, it is absolutely horrific. And the United States can be such a force for making positive contributions. And I think, you know, other countries are trying, but the U.S. really can make a much bigger difference if they try to do this work and do it as quickly as possible.
And in Sudan, what is the generational impact here when you don't get food to a kid?
You know, look, first of all, they're not getting food. They're facing horrible sexual violence. I was just in Chad and heard stories that could just break your heart. And it's devastating. And the results, as you say, will last for generations.
Thank you for sharing that. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. I'm Margaret Brennan.